Agora, Wagner, essa imagem, olha que coisa mais linda, né? É o nosso planeta Terra. E isso me lembrou o discurso de abertura, né, do Afonso Mamed, em que ele fala, não há lado de fora do planeta. Se você joga lixo, joga algum resíduo, vai cair aqui, viu, gente? Não tem escapatória, cai aqui mesmo. Então, o quão é importante a gente reduzir a zero a quantidade de resíduos que a gente coloca no nosso solo, no nosso planeta, né? Na nossa água.
Isso é uma meta que a gente vai ter que chegar nesse ponto. E a próxima palestra, Bruna, ela traz um palestrante americano que é o maior especialista mundial em lixo zero. E ele vai trazer informações que a gente ainda não tem aqui no Brasil. O nosso curador, Ian McKee, que foi quem conectou esse especialista, já nos confidenciou que nem ele, Ian, tem informações que ele está trazendo nessa palestra. Então, assim, é uma palestra de muita expectativa que o mercado brasileiro precisa acompanhar. E eu queria que você apresentasse a palestra e o especialista que vai compartilhar conosco esse conhecimento.
Pois é, o nome da palestra não podia ser diferente, né? Zero Waste, como chegar lá? Eu acho que essa é a pergunta que não quer calar, né, gente? O nosso palestrante é o senhor Richardy Anthony. Ele é consultor com 49 anos de carreira em projetos de gestão do meio ambiente. Ele é fundador e presidente da Zero Waste International Alliance, a maior entidade global desenvolvendo e disseminando o conceito de lixo zero ou zero desperdício. Ele é também fundador e membro do conselho da National Recycling. Me ajuda aí.
Coalizão.
Coalizão, é.
Eu não estou lendo muito bem aqui.
É, aqui eu também não estou conseguindo.
Eu estou vendo que também ele é da California Research Recovery Association,
Isso.
The Grassroots Recycling Network, Zero Waste americano e Zero Waste San Diego.
É
certo?
isso aí. Muito bem. É que cada currículo aqui,
Fantástico.
cada currículo é um desafio pra gente, fala a verdade.
É verdade, é para derrubar o apresentador. Mas eu desconfio, Bruna, que o nosso curador Ian McKee também está chegando aí junto com o nosso palestrante.
Pois é, que bacana, né?
Sim, eu
Então
acho que ele vai
ver?
nos ajudar a aproveitar ao máximo esse conhecimento e que, como eu falei no começo, ele ainda não foi acessado aqui no Brasil. Então a gente está com muita expectativa com essa palestra. Eu mesmo estou muito curioso porque é uma coisa que afeta a vida pessoal de cada um de nós, né?
É isso aí. E ninguém melhor para ajudar a gente nesses questionamentos que passam pela nossa cabeça do que o Richard e o Ian. Vamos ver? Vamos lá.
Bom, pessoal, é um prazer estar aqui. O meu nome é Ian McKee. Eu sou o curador da temática de economia circular. E é um grande prazer para mim poder apresentar o Sr. Richard Anthony. O Richard, ele é consultor há 49 anos, trabalhando em projetos de gestão do meio ambiente. Ele é fundador e presidente da Zero Waste International Alliance, a maior entidade global desenvolvendo e disseminando o conceito de lixo zero ou zero desperdício. Ele é também fundador e membro do conselho da National Recycling Coalition, da California Resource Recovery Association, the Grassroots Recycling Network, Zero Waste USA e Zero Waste San Diego. Richard, um prazer ter você aqui. Very nice to have you. It's a real pleasure. And thank you for joining us. And I'm going to start sharing your presentation.
Well, thanks, Ian. It's good to be here. I've been to Brazil probably 8 times in the last 10 years, starting with putting together a major zero waste conference with Rodrigo Sabatini in Florianopolis. And then we were at the Rio +9 conference where we got to spend some time in Rio. Actually went down the Amazon and stayed there for a while. And then we followed the U.S. team during World Cup. And so we got to go to Nantes, to Recife, to Manaus in the middle of the jungle. I love Brazil. I love the food. I love the people. I think we can do something in terms of handling our resources for the future. So let's move on to the first slide. So when we start to talk about resource management, because that's what it is, and I want to give you a little, just a tiny little bit of my background. I've been in this field for 50 years, and I really have started from the bottom and reached my top, and then I found another place to be. Bottom line, I spent 4 years running a recycling center at Long Beach State College in the early 70s, which led me to SES Engineers for another 4 years, where we set up office paper programs for the Environmental Protection Agency. We also set the first curbside program in in rural California in San Luis Obispo. Plus, they did a lot of landfill siting, in which I was the guy who looked at the recycling and the amount of diversion that was going to happen if the landfill was actually sited. That's basically so they could figure out how much capacity they're going to along the landfill will last. So one of the key issues that and I did that for 10 years. I cited the first landfill, yeah, double line landfill under the new EPA regs in California in 1985, and then that was pretty made my name, and I was able to catch a promotion to go to San Diego, California, where I became the resource manager for about 1.5 million, population county 3 million people. We had all the landfills except for the city, and we had 13 cities feeding into it. I was to find a new landfill site for North County. That's why they hired me. But when I went to the board of supervisors, the chair looked at me and said, "Well, that's fine, but what about recycling? The city's doing recycling. What about us?" I said, "Sure, we should do that." She said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" I said, "I'll write a recycling plan." And we did. It was a 10-point plan that included everything from waste composition studies to you setting up in county offices and providing equipment to all the cities. And literally over the 4-year time period, I asked for $1 a ton, bearing 3 million tons a year, $1 million to play with. And the bottom line is, we from we gave every city bins and trucks to start recycling, coordinated a regional education program, basically set up yard waste collecting because we realized that we could separate that out and collect it a lot cheaper. And with the yard material separated, we had more room in the landfill, and plus we had a market. The farmers were looking for compost. It was kind of an interesting process. Anyhow, after that period of time, we actually dropped it from 3 million to 1.2 million tons in the 4 years. New board of supervisors, what can I tell you? Put it up for bid, sold to Allied Republic for 300 million cash, and like very disappointing to me. But I learned a lesson. Spent a little bit of my final career with the county in wastewater management, learning about that. And then the last 20 years, basically, I've been doing zero waste plans for cities like Los Angeles, Austin, Texas, Fort Collins. We even did one in England, in uh, Anglia, East Anglia, Waveney. But the bottom line is that when we start talking about resources and we're talking about recycling, the bottom line is that the majority of these things, technical materials, paper, the number one and the number two plastics, steel and non-ferrous metals, these are all valuable commodities, and they're listed on the stock exchange. They're out there in the market stream, and I could be in Sao Paulo, Brazil, looking at the laptop of the waste pickers and find that they're getting the same price for baled polypropylene as we were getting in Fort Collins, Colorado. It's a global market. That's my point. It's a global market, and the fact is, we're growing in population. These resources are finite, except for trees. But then again, we've lost most of our hardwoods and 90% of our forests, and I'm worried about that in Brazil. We all are losing our forests and our oxygen supply for the county, for the planet. So on this slide, basically, we go to the next one, is showing you the material prepared for moving to market. And the last slide is, we got that when we were in China. Who says there's not a market for plastic? This guy's got a whole bicycle full of material, and a lot of this stuff is going through the informal sector. I'll say this: we've had shortages over the last 500 years, and they've created closed circles for paper. You have paper yards, and for scrap metal, you have metal yards. And actually, glass plants have been pulling it in as long as I've been in the field. Uh, but the oil industry never really took responsibility, and they rather burn this stuff than recycle it. But the fact is that the market is that it melts, it makes new products cheaper than going with the virgin, and that uh, there's a market for it. There's a huge market. Next slide, Ian. So, part of after this 50 years of being a professional resource manager for, San Diego is not a small county. It's the sixth largest county in the United States. So that's right up there in the top 50 of the world. And we were able to do some things. We also work in the professional area, and we're part of the I am now part of the Zero Waste USA and part of the Zero Waste International Alliance. And I just want to read this peer reviewed definition of zero waste. That when I say peer review, we're talking about people from all over the world, from Brazil, from Canada, from Germany, from the Philippines, from Japan, from China, from Ohio. Basically have bought into the latest definition of zero waste. Zero waste is the conservation of all resources by means of responsible production, consumption, and reuse, and the recovery of products, packaging, and materials without burning and with no discharges to land, water, or air that threaten the environment or human health. Uh, we all agree with this. It's an international definition. It's where we want to go. We say zero waste is a journey. You aspire to get there. We know we can get close. That's what we want to do. So when actually Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor, and they were talking about climate, uh, he did a study where they looked at what would happen if you recycled California. And the result was it would be the elimination, it's the same as eliminating all the exhaust. Well, that's huge because what was bringing Schwarzenegger to looking at this was the whole concept of the carbon and the global warming and the climate change and how we need to reduce carbon. So at that point, and it was like, 2009 or 10 around that area. And the bottom line is he realized that, during the recession, doing this recycling would create thousands of new jobs. In fact, it turns out, if you look at it, the recycling industry employs more people than the auto industry. It's a bigger industry because these are the feedstocks for all those industries. You wouldn't have cars if you didn't have recycled steel. And I'd say most of your steel on this planet is recycled, been more than once. Next slide. So it's a matter of reducing carbon, which is a big deal. The climate's the big deal, and the reason is that when you look at the planet, and this is not a new picture, it's fairly old, but this is the methane caps on top of the planet. It's getting more intense, and what's that doing is causing the polar ice caps to melt, and what's that's doing is raising the ocean, changing the currents, and creating incredible weather change like we've never seen before. Hurricanes that reach 100-year slides, and the next day it's another one just as big. So reduce methane, and methane is 21 times as dangerous as impact as carbon dioxide. Next slide. So this is the planet. We got to reduce this methane cap. We have to make it. So it turns out that it's about resources, that's resource management, but it's really about climate and reducing greenhouse gases. We show the Wasteberg is for 1 ton of a finished product, 1 ton of finished products, 71 tons of resources and energy were used to make it. The best example is like an aluminum can. They got to extract the material, the basis for aluminum, and then make it into alumina, and then from alumina into aluminum, they press it and they roll it. When you take an aluminum can, you melt it down and you roll it back. It's like 90% of the energy and materials used in making that first can was saved when you made the second can. And this goes for pretty much all materials. If you take paper and recycle it back, you're saving the cutting of a tree and all that transportation to do that. If you recycle metal, it's about reducing the extraction costs and the transportation costs and the energy it takes to put it into where you want. So our concept here is that on the very front of this resource management thing, we want to reduce, we want to prevent, and then we want to reuse because we want to save that inherent energy that was in that product in the first place. Next slide. And it's the oil companies. I'll say it straight out. It's the oil companies. They came around in the 50s and started pumping oil, and then they had all this hazardous residue, and Monsanto and DuPont to figure out what to do with it. And they looked at it and said, you can wrap food in it. And so literally all our food today is made out of a hazardous waste residue from the oil barrel. And the thing is, it's cheaper than having to deal with the hazardous waste, so they'd almost give it away. And literally, that's why you see it out there in the environment. We put all our packages, our materials are all in this one single-use plastics. This is an albatross. It's found in the middle of the Pacific in the Midway atolls. There are hundreds of thousands of them, and they roost out there. Well, when materials, primarily single-use plastics, is what we're seeing because paper will dissolve and so will organics, and metal will sink, but plastics float and they stay there and they go with the current. And we all know about how there's these dead zones, and one of these dead zones is near the Midway atolls, and all this plastic goes up on the islands, and the birds roost to have their babies and to feed their babies these materials because it looks like fish. So the bottom line on this is that the single-use concept, not reducing, not reusing, not preventing, not recycling, not composting, is creating a blight on the environment. One, in the terms of the answer, the industry says burn it in a garbage incinerator, polluting the atmosphere. Are you kidding me? And the other one is put it in a landfill or just let it out there. And these are not answers. These are not good answers for what to do with this stuff. They need to take responsibility. The youth out there today and this is worldwide, break free from plastic. They don't want anything to do with plastic anymore. I see a value in it. But I do see that the oil industry and its petro partners that make these materials, they need to work on the take back side very, very fast because the planet can't sustain this kind of abuse. They look at the next 20 years as be as much plastic in the ocean as fish. This is not right. It's not good. We shouldn't do it. Next slide. This is what I think. This turned me in 1970. It's been updated, but it's from the Club of Rome. It's the Meadows charts, limits to growth. And bottom line, if you look on the bottom, it's the 1900s and 2100s is the timeline. And the top dotted line is resources. And you can see at time resource starts to go down, and it parallels the dark black line, which is the increase in population. Well, in 1970, when I'm running this college recycling center, I'm looking at this chart and I'm going, well, that's coming up. It's the cross line when resources are minimized and population growth. It's like the classic Marxist scenario of the have and the have-nots. Well, as a matter of fact, that has happened. We're in 2020, and the population of the planet is at 7 billion. There's diminishing in Europe. The whole European Union is reorganizing how they're dealing with resources because the engineers are recognizing finally that they're running out of metal. And they don't know, some of these metals are becoming semi-precious or precious metals. And so my point on this chart is one, yes, the population of the planet is exceeding its ability to cover its resources. World Watch predicts about 10 billion. 10 billion, we'd have to have all the same kind of diet, and probably the biggest tree would be a pine tree, and maybe some seagulls. But we're losing our species every day. Some species of animal or plant or insect is dying off this planet because of the way we're managing it, and so that has to be changed. The other issue is this: why would you burn or bury your resources when there was less and less of them more available? I mean, it's anybody who looks at this market, looks at this industry over the, you'll see in my sense in the last 50 years, the prices for these materials have increased more and more and more. Now, part of our problem right now is we subsidize pollution by taking taxpayers' money and building costly incinerators or wasteful landfills that compete with doing the right kinds of things. Our take is let's don't do that anymore. There is no way. That is, your way is my backyard. Um, they want to throw nuclear waste in the desert, but that's not going to work because there's people and animal and there's ecosystems there. Um, the best is to, when we say in zero waste, is that uh, zero waste means emulating nature. Look at the combination that nature works together, and when you plan your resource management, deal with that part of it. And the other part is designing for the environment. So that's what that's all about. And the key principle here is that the key principle of this whole zero waste approach is to require source separation at the source. The bottom line is that you can throw it all in one bin, and what you do is you mess it all up, and you spend millions and millions and millions of dollars for machineries, magnets, and lasers, and eddy currents, and blowers, and everything to try to separate it. When you could just ask the human being who generated it to put it into a proper category. It's a blue bin. It's a blue bin that has paper and containers. That's what's in it, nothing else. And then there's a green bin, and that's your food and your yard trimmings, and that's your organic. And then there's that trash bin, which gets less and less. And I'll say there's a fourth piece too, and that's the reusables. I'll talk about them later. But if you could, this kind of system of separation by the generator allows the recovery of most of the resources that are generated. Let's go to the next slide. So I talked a little about nature as the model. Just for the academics who are listening in, uh, Eugene Bennis, biomimicry. It's a whole field where they look at how nature works and then try to design stuff based on those same kinds of concepts. Uh, I think that's the way we ought to go. We live on a natural planet. Why would we fight this? We need to join it. Next slide. Okay, so here's the deal. Again, for the academics, William McDonough, Cradle to Cradle. Okay, so you're going to go out and you're going to do a project and you're going to do a life cycle analysis. And in your life cycle analysis, because it's a cradle to grave analysis, you're going to look at incineration and landfill. But we consider incineration landfill pollution. Incinerator waste resources, 30% of it is a toxic ash that still has to be buried, and the gases can't be controlled. They haven't updated the control technology in 20 years. The best they can do is spend millions and I mean talk hundreds of millions of dollars and get the heat up to 2,000 degrees and then basically nuke all the stuff, but still now you're become an energy sink and not an energy maker. It just doesn't make sense. It's obsolete. In the United States, we haven't permitted a new incinerator in the last 20 years, and we won't. And we're on the way to shutting them all down. They're just not an efficient way of handling resources. On the same end, landfills are a pollution of the ground and the air. The organics are in there decomposing. The water turns into what they call a leachate, but it's just a heavy water that goes to the bottom of the fill and into your groundwater, into your drinking water. What Gunnar says, two cycles, a technical cycle and an organic cycle. He calls it a biological materials and technical materials. Now, the picture here is from a MacArthur Foundation, and basically they've taken McDonough's theory and they put it into a chart. But the bottom line with McDonough says, once you recognize it's either organic or it's technical, if you design something in between, you're a violator in the environment. It's true because you put something out that is not part of the recycle, the reuse, the closed circle economy. So what we're saying, and we're all saying it, now the big companies are starting to buy into it. In fact, what you're now seeing is the big companies are saying, we want a closed circle economy, so we're going to take a guaranteed minimum content of recyclable material in the product that we're making, which is then going to increase the value of that material. Okay, so you have two cycles. One's this organic cycle. We can follow it first. It's a local biogas, and then it's compost, and then it's made into soil, and the soil then goes back into the farms, and it's a closed circle kind of thing. Now, it's true in anaerobic digestion, and we're not against digestion because it's a natural decomposition that creates the heat. It's not adding heat to it. It's a natural part. It's a natural part of the environment. And in an anaerobic situation, methane is created. In a vessel, they capture the methane. Typically, this is a sewer treatment plant, and yes, Brazil, you do need to get sewer treatment plants. It's wrong to see your estuaries and your beaches polluted with the sewage. It's just absolutely wrong. But the bottom line is the technical material can be recycled. You start with first the materials, tools, and then reuse, repair, and then recycling, and then finally it comes back to materials and back into the use. And all the big companies are buying into it. Now we show on the bottom incineration and landfill, and we got a red around it because it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable for the future of this planet. It's unacceptable for your grandchildren and the people that we're planning for. Maybe you see it's cheaper today to do some of these things. In 20 years, which is the length of that contract, it will not be. We've been in Europe, and we were in Lyon, France, and the mayor says, I'm zero waste. I said, how can you be? He said, well, we recycle 50% and we burn the rest. And said, well, look, why don't you just give us the stuff you burn and we'll recycle it? And he looked at us and he said, give it to you? I'm paying $100 a ton to have them burn it, and I'm locked into that contract for 20 years. So I'm warning you on that. You're going to get this slick stuff that says, we'll pay it, we'll finance it. All you do is provide the garbage at a price. And if you don't provide the garbage, you're going to provide us the equal amount of energy to meet our client, which is on the other side of the incinerator trying to buy the electricity. So how do I know this? When I started the career, the state gave us a contract to find out what was in the landfills in the state of California. So we did one of the first Northern California landfill composition studies at 4 different sites. I had the engineers looked at me and said, "Well, you're the recycler. You know what to do." And then literally, we put it together from scratch, maybe 7 or 8 categories. By the time we're in San Diego, we're separating in about 15 or 20 different categories because we know the market's there and we know it works, and we really want to know. Well, this was done by Dan Knapp. Dr. Knapp is a sociologist who was working on a waste energy facility up in Lane, Oregon that blew up. And Dan really didn't like the idea anyhow, so he kind of moved to Berkeley, got a job in the landfill, basically sorting out resources. And he said, well, what are we doing? Well, we're going to sell this stuff. So pretty soon he started realizing that, well, no, it's more than just chairs and tables. These are market materials. And he would created these master market categories. And in my last 20 years, I've used these market categories to estimate the value of the discards to go in. And pretty much I can sell paper to a paper dealer. It can be mixed, just as long as it's not dirty and it doesn't have organics in it or plastic, they'll buy it. The same thing with metal. If it's a mixed metals, he's got a magnet. He'll fix it. It's not a problem. The glass wants to be pretty clean. They like the clear over that. Plastic needs to be. If I had just hard plastic containers, 1s, 2s, and 4s, there's plenty of markets there. Enough money in those containers to have people separate them out. It's absolutely true. By looking at this chart, you can see that what I've done is taken the organic materials and put them at the bottom. So from plant debris, which is yard trimmings, and then putrescibles, which is food scraps and food discards, soil, and then Kleenex and napkins, food dirty paper are all organic. They all are a good recipe for a composting program. And what we think, if you met what we've done in California, what happened in California is when Jerry Brown got in and he saw uh, the city's climate plans that the cities had to make, they found out in most of the climate plans, the landfill waste management was one of the third or fourth or largest generator of greenhouse gases. So he flew over the landfills in California and saw incredible amounts of methane. And because of that, he looked at the engineers and basically at the air board level said, how do you mitigate that? And what the engineers said, well, the bottom line is you don't put it in the first place. Something, the environmentalists have been saying for years was now said by science. And today there's a organic ban at the landfills in California, and cities are now moving to collect it, moving it to composting. In Northern California, they've been taking food and yard trimmings for the last 5 years. They have giant facilities. They feed the wineries. They feed the new cannabis industry that's growing. They feed the San Joaquin Valley farmers with the needed mulch they need and compost they need without having to go to petrochemicals. As oil becomes more and more scarce, this is going to be a more important thing for sustainability for the community. So my goal in Brazil would be to go straight after the organics, do the organics first, pull them all out. The rest of the stuff, you won't even want to burn it anymore because once you make soil, what the rest is you have is technical materials. You're looking at me and you're saying, okay, fine, you're crazy, man. There's no way you're going to get anybody to separate in 12 categories. And you're right. The first zero waste plan I did in Del Norte County, small county up in Northern California, 1998. Kind of looked and said, okay, how are the people act here? What are they doing? Well, the recyclables, we did have redemption programs. So, the bottles and cans were saved and taken to the store for redemption. A lot of reuse going on in more rural areas. And the organics, well, feed the family, feed the neighbors, feed the animals, and then feed the soil. So that was taken care of that way. Um, the reusable materials, well, if you had old clothing or chairs, you take them to the church or give them to charity. That's part of our heritage for hundreds and hundreds of years, charity. And then special discards are things that, you don't throw away every day, and so you have to find them. And more these days are chemicals. Okay, so literally, there what I say is four clusters, and for us in California, that's a blue bin and a green bin and a reusable bin, and then a trash bin for what fits in the through the cracks, and then the reuse special take them somewhere. And what do you do with those mixed recyclables? Well, you take them to a materials recovery facility where it could be on conveyor belts doing hand sorting with magnets and basic technology like they do in some parts of Brazil, or they could be sophisticated like they're doing up in San Diego and San Francisco. We got lasers and eddy currents and magnets, but the bottom line is they'll take in the containers and the papers and separate them out into marketable categories and sell them. Well, the organics, they don't go to a landfill. They don't go to an incinerator. They go to a composting facility, whether it's an outdoor windrow where they turn it or an in vessel digester. Uh, that 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 in the digester they capture the methane and the soil is then again composted and placed back. And same thing with the composting facility, sold to the farmers. Reduce and repair. Well, okay, that my answer is a warehouse, basically, where you pick these things up and they allow the repair guys to come in and grab what they want, and the thrift stores to buy what they want, and what's left is dismantled and made into separated into recyclable materials. Goodwill here in San Diego County it's a huge organization. 90% of what they bring in, they either sell or recycle. It's a and then the regulated materials, well, these materials don't go in landfills. You don't burn them in an incinerator. They're chemicals, paints. They have to go back, take back. We have in California take back programs for paint and for carpets and for batteries and now medical. We don't want these things in a landfill. You want people throwing pills, flushing them down the toilet. You don't want them. You don't want them going. You don't want these things to happen. So you have to have opportunities for people to have. So that's your processing center. So as you're looking to the future in Brazil and you're building your infrastructure, you've got a half of the stream, which is recyclables, which has got a huge market value. Look at organics and you look at reuse, that's going back into your community. That's going to go back over and over and over again. So you're going to get additional value, additional factor threes, factor five, factor 10 in the area of saving energy, saving uh, air pollution, basically making the planet work a little better. I ran landfills for 20 years. I mean, I did. We did our best to make them safe and try to capture what comes in. But um, if they weren't lying, they were going to leak. And then what we started to find out under the law is that if you produce any kind of gas, you pretty much have to capture it. It can't go off sites. You'll go into somebody's basement and blow up their house. So we started lining the outside of the landfills with trenches, and in the trenches would put perforated pipes and then rocks, and the gas would migrate to the outside of the landfill into the trenches, into the pipe, and then we flare the gas off. Well, about 1980, some really old folks in the audience will remember these days, but there was oil boycotts and price. You couldn't get gas, let alone the price of gas went up. You had to wait in line. It was every other day. Uh, it was what they started doing is when you started looking at a future building, they would looking at increasing the energy costs at 10 cents, 10% every year. Well, the energy companies seeing this offered 10 cents a kilowatt hour for anybody who could develop any alternative energy sources. They would pay them that cost. And so if you could get one of those certificates that had the 10 cents a kilowatt hour, that was the basis to coming in and setting up an incinerator or a generator at least. And so what they did is they saw landfills as huge opportunities, and they were. We hooked ours up in Fresno, and um, they were sucking our greenhouse gases out. The problem is if they sucked it too much, they caused explosions inside of the landfill. They learned that in the process. And what it turns out is that these systems only get about 20 to 30% of the gas that is created. So they become the landfills still are the largest sources of greenhouse gases. And it's primarily methane. So the key is then uh, I'm not against landfill. I think a double line landfill with no organics, with no wet stuff, no liquids, is a dry tomb. And I don't know where to put painted wood um, because it's got lead in it, lead painted wood. So I don't want to burn it, and I don't want to compost it. So I could put it in a dry tomb. But the key is to get the organics out. That's the number one thing. But it's a win-win. You don't have the cost of having to mitigate a problem. You don't have the pollution of your groundwater and your air, plus you creating another resource that's going to be used to conserve water and rebuild your soil and to develop a whole closed circle economy.
And Rick, just to be clear, what is generating the methane is the organic or food waste, mostly in landfills that are decomposing anaerobically, correct?
Absolutely. It's the organic material. And with the water that's in there, comes in there, it can increase decomposition. In fact, some of the crazy engineers out in Georgia were trying to use well, I don't say it's crazy because Chinese for years have put organic into pits outside the town and captured that methane to run their kitchens. Um, in India, everybody handles their own organics, but the city gives them digesters so they can run methane in their own cooking gear. And in the apartment houses we visited, that's exactly what they were doing. Um, so yes, it decomposes. It creates a gas that can be utilized for cooking, and the residual that's left after decomposition is a soil amendment. I hope I made my point. The bottom line, the planet's in jeopardy. We all know that. that we have to handle resources better. There's two cycles. There's a technical cycle and there's an organic cycle. And if we pull the organic cycle, not only will we reduce greenhouse gases coming from landfills, uh, you don't want these incinerators anyhow because they're heat sinks. That is, they're water. I mean, most organics is 90% water. So you put it in an incinerator, it's going to lower the temperature while as it dries the material out. So typically, when an incinerator wants is paper and plastic. Well, we can recycle that, folks. We can recycle those things. So the organic material, that's the top left, is collected pretty simply. This is just a 3-yard bin in an apartment house. Put your organics here at the curb. You put it into a green barrel. Um, the collection is made by a special collection system. Trucks picking up just green material. When we started this program with the yard waste, it turned out the haulers liked it better because you can get more density in the truck, and they don't make their money traveling to and from the landfill. They make their money collecting door to door. So when I lowered the price for organics at the landfill by half, they started their own collection programs, and they thanked me for doing it. Once you get to the landfill, I like an open windrow concept, but in airtainment areas like in Southern California, we're probably going to move to what these are called ag bags or Gore-Tex, but basically they're liners. They have slits in them, and there's air injected from the bottom, and it's a on-site digestion. It's not a matter like a windrow where you run a turner to turn it. It makes it aerobic. Just the air is pushed in through it, but after 5 or 6 weeks, it becomes soil, and the bags can be reused.
One of the companies that's going to be presenting also at this conference uses this method. They use a Gore cover.
Right. The Gore-Tex has been pretty popular. I saw it being picked here as the cover. I mean, the city of San Diego runs a 200,000 ton per year composting facility at its landfill. It's one of the few outdoor composting windrow systems located in the middle of a big city. And they meet the air regulations and they don't get too many complaints. In fact, when you drive by it, you smell it and you go, oh my God, they're making compost. It's really a good smell. It's an earthy smell. But they have decided on for yard material, they're really kind of worried about as we start to add food here in San Diego about that impacts. And so they are moving towards the Gore-Tex, and they've got about 8 or 10 big windrows. The private composter, one of them uses the windrows and one of them uses Gore-Tex. So it's there. Um, the cheapest would be the windrow. If you were in an open area, didn't have a big city around you, that might be the way you want to go. But the bottom line in the last picture is you get a soil that is pretty much a soil amendment. It's got a lot of stuff you need. The more food you add in, the more nitrogen you're going to put into that soil, the more it becomes valuable. And there's other things to mix in there as well. If you use a lot of paper material, there's manures. Manure management is a big issue in a lot of the big areas. Some of these can be made into blends that can be blend for different kind of crops. One of the experiences we're doing on the Big Island of Hawaii is actually looking at different kinds of compost mix for different kinds of plants. It's a whole industry, and it's a good industry. For hundreds and hundreds of years, folks, we collected garbage. If it was collected at the curb, it was collected from the pig farmers to feed animals. This is typically all over the world. The hog farmers were the basis of solid of organic management in all cities. If they threw the stuff in the street, the pig farmers came and ran the pigs down the middle of the street. That's one of the reasons that the streets are a little higher in England. The doors are down is because they kept throwing dirt over these roads after pigs went through it. In the 70s, after the war, and we stopped the fighting and we had to rebuild our economies, we went to either incinerators in Europe or big pits in the Western Hemisphere, uh, and because we didn't understand what leachate does in a landfill. We didn't have electron microscopes. We had when I first went to the engineering company in 1970, I asked the engineers, how fast does leachate travel through dirt? They don't know. we had the ability to look at parts per thousand, not part. Today we do know. We do know what it is and what it does and what it can do, and we want to handle it differently. So the bottom line is, as you conceive of your system, you conceive of the organics not going to a landfill, but going to the farm. Now, if it goes to a composting facility before the farm, that's fine. In my mind, I think a farmer has the right to grow soil. He ought to have the right to take in organics to make his soil for his farm. And if he makes too much of it, he ought to have the right to sell it to his neighbors for them to do it too. But the bottom line is to remanage organics to make it not go to landfills, but go to farms. The other way is to use pasture management. In this case, we say talk to the farmers. What they're finding up in Marin is they're just taking mulch and spreading it through the pastures. It's retaining water. The cows are getting fatter. Greenhouse gases are being depleted. But so there's plenty of places to put it, is what I'm saying. You need to coordinate with the farmers and the resource managers. Next slide. This is my example of what I think that you ought to do in Brazil. And these are windrows. You can see that they're turning, and as you see, it gets farther and farther to the left. The soil gets darker and darker. These are fairly easy to manage. 3 or 4 people can do it, and if you have the open space, it's probably the way to go. Last slide. So you need to, and the government and the industry have investment. The example here, this is a dairy farmer, makes milk, but he had a huge manure problem. So he's got a small digester. Digester makes methane to run the farm and the dairy, and the result is this wonderful soil that he's selling. So besides milk, he also actually sells soil as well. With the pig farmers, we found that they were feeding it to the animals. The animals were eating the food, and the food became uh, manure, and then underneath the manure, he found worms. And so he had built a market for worm farming as well. So the idea is there's an investment in this whole organic side that needs to happen. This is the sustainable industry of our society. It's what we have to deal with. Um, I think we have to do it. So the bottom line is zero waste. It's a journey. We say to people, if you're not for zero waste, how much waste are you for? Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Rick, so much. Really, really appreciate it. I wish we had time for questions, but unfortunately, or fortunately, we got a lot of content here, and we learned a lot.
All right, thanks.